Now, the new year is upon us, so I thought I would do a new year inspired cake tutorial. So I'm going to be showing you how to make these really fun disco balls that you can add onto your cakes or your cupcakes. I'm also going to be showing you how you can add text on the front of your cakes. Now, wherever in the world you're watching this, I just want to wish you a very happy and healthy 2024. Okay, let's get started. So the things that we're going to need in order to make our disco ball is, first of all, we need to create a sphere for all those little squares to go on. And for this, you have a few different options. Now, we could use silicone molds with some chocolate or candy melts, and this will allow you to create a fully edible disco ball. Alternatively, we could use some polystyrene balls as the base for our disco ball, and I'm actually going to show you both methods. I've then got some fondant that I've coloured in a light grey colour, and to do this I've just used a tiny amount of black food gel. Then got some edible glue and lots of different shades of grey luster dust. Now, if you did want your disco ball to be completely edible, I'm going to show you how to use the silicone mould to create a little sphere. Now, I have 3 different sizes here. This is the 7cm mold, which I'm actually going to be using in the tutorial, but I also have a 4cm and a 3cm one too, so you can make the balls whatever size you like. So I've just got some white candy melts, or you could use white chocolate, and I'm going to melt these down in the microwave, starting with a few blasts of 30 seconds and then doing intervals of around 10 seconds until they've melted. Now, I like to take my candy melts out of the microwave just before all of those candy buttons have melted, and just stir it around with my spatula until I've got a nice smooth mixture. And this just stops me overheating those candy melts. If you were using white chocolate for this, you would need to temper your chocolate. Now, because we're going to be able to see some of our sphere behind those squares that we're going to add on, I'm going to colour my candy melts in grey. So I've just got some of the black colour mill. I'm just adding a very small amount so that I get this grey shade. I can then spoon some of my mixture into those half spheres, and you want to make sure you've got quite a thick rim at the top, as this is where we're going to be joining the 2 pieces together. And you can always go in and just remove the excess. So I'm just tipping that upside down, allowing any excess candy melt just to drip out, and you can just clean that up with an offset spatula. Once that's set, I'm then going to turn the 2 halves of my sphere out. Now, to join those together, I've just got a small metal scraping tool, and I'm going to use my kitchen blowtorch. So I'm just going to heat up the surface of that metal scraper just to melt that edge. I can then push them together. So we've got this grey ball which we can use as a base for our disco ball. Now, alternatively, we could use a polystyrene ball. The only thing with this option is that they will need to be removed from the cake before you cut it, as they're not edible. So here I've got a 5cm ball, and I've actually got 20 grams of this light grey fondant. Now, I've rolled this into a ball, and I'm going to squidge it down into a dish shape. I'm then going to take some edible glue and just paint that over the top before placing on my ball. I'm then going to use my fingers just to work that fondant over the ball, so just pulling it down. Now, once I've got a small gap remaining, I'm just going to add a little bit more edible glue onto that before pulling that fondant all the way around and joining it together. Now, currently that looks a little bumpy, so I'm going to roll this between the palm of my hand just to smooth it out. Now, this is also a great way to add balls or balloons onto your cake if you didn't want to make them out of chocolate. So you could just leave these in colours to match the theme of your cake. So then we've got our polystyrene ball covered in this thin layer of fondant. So we've got 2 different options for the base of our disco ball. Now, this is where the fun bit starts. We're going to make all the squares go over our disco ball. So I've got some more of that light grey fondant, and I'm going to roll this out until it's around 1mm in thickness. Now, a real disco ball is made up of little squares of glass, and each of these pieces of glass catches the light in a different way and makes it look a different shade of grey. So what I've got here are some white and grey luster dust. First of all, I've got the pearl white, so this is one by Sweet Sticks. I've then got a light silver. I've then got the satin silver by Sugar Flare, the gunmetal grey again by Sweet Sticks, and also their charcoal grey. So using a little paint tray, I'm just going to add the luster dust. Now you could dust these directly onto your grey fondant, but to make them a bit shinier, I'm actually going to add some dipping solution. The great thing about dipping solution is once that paint has dried, it actually goes back to being dust form, and this makes it super shiny. So using a fluffy brush, I'm just going to mix the dipping solution with that luster dust and start to paint that onto my fondant. Now, by doing it in order of lightness, starting with the lightest one first, it means I don't actually have to clean my brush. Now I'm just going to leave that for a couple of seconds until that paint has dried, and I'm going to use a larger fluffy brush just to buff out the paintbrush marks, and this just makes it super shiny. So you can see how super shiny that is. I've then got a small piece of card which just measures 6mm across, and I'm going to use this as a guide so that all of my pieces are the same width. So I'm just using a pizza cutter, cutting that out and just moving the strip across. I'm then going to line those back up and go back in the opposite direction so that I get lots of different silver squares that are all the same size. Okay, so here we have loads of my little squares ranging in all different shades from the pearly white up to the really dark grey. Okay, so I'm going to start by showing you how to cover the polystyrene ball that's been covered in fondant. One thing you can also do is take a cocktail stick or a bamboo skewer and just push that into your ball, and it just gives you something to hold, or you could place it into a dummy cake while you're working on it. Now for this one you only need to use water. I'm going to start by creating a line of my squares around the centre of my ball. You want to get this as straight as you can. I'm just adding on those little squares in no particular order. So we're going to have all the different shades, and this is just going to make it look like the light is catching that ball. Now I do have a really tiny gap, so I'm just going to cut one of my little squares down. So as you can see, we've got a line of our squares going all the way around. I'm then going to come up and just add another row, and again in no particular order, just start adding on those squares. Now I'm trying to push these squares quite close together, but as we work up to the top and the bottom of the ball, you will start to see some of that grey coming through from the fondant behind. And I'm just going to continue all the way up that ball until I've got a small gap at the top. Now at the centre of my ball I've got this little round gap. So to fill that, I'm going to take some of my squares and chop these into triangles. Now depending on the size of your ball and the size of the squares that you're using, sometimes you may just have enough space for a single square. I've got this little gap which is around 1 centimetre in diameter, and just using my craft knife, just pick up the little triangles, and that's just going to fill that gap. So there you can see the top of our ball. Now we've done half of our disco ball, so I'm just going to turn it over. I'm just going to do exactly the same thing, just working my way to the bottom of the ball. So it's just about covering as much of that surface area with the different shades of little squares, which is really going to make it look like a disco ball. So once that's been covered, there we have our disco ball. I'm then going to do exactly the same thing on our larger ball, which we created using those candy melts. This one is slightly bigger, and I'm going to be using the edible glue to help those stick. I'm going to do exactly the same, just starting around the center. And the great thing about this one is by doing this, you're actually covering that join. I'm then continuing to add those squares all over the ball, starting with the top half before working around the bottom. You can then make as many disco balls as you like. So the next thing for me to do is to create the cake that these are going to sit on. So I've covered a 5-inch cake, and this one is just 5 inches across and 5 inches in height. And I've covered it with this really pretty pink fondant, which I coloured using the Colour Mill Rose Pink. So I think these disco balls would look great on a birthday cake or a celebration cake. And as this cake is coming out near New Year, I thought it would be fun to add Happy New Year to the front of the cake. And for this, I'm going to be using one of the Sweet Stamp letter sets. Now, this is actually one of the sets from their Christmas collection, and it's called Santa Baby. But I think this would be perfect all year round, as it is the most prettiest little set. These letters just have this really pretty details. We have these tiny little hearts and these leaves just running up the side. So I'm going to take out the letters for Happy New Year, and you just want to use either a piece of fondant or some blue tack. And I'm also going to be using one of the Sweet Stamp pickup pad, and this just allows you to create a stamp to push onto your cake. And you may have seen this on the channel before, as I really do love the Sweet Stamp letter sets. Now, because this one does have a pattern, we want the pattern to push into the cake. So as we lay it out to get them in place, I'm just going to place that face down. I'm also going to leave a gap for the second P. I'm going to start just by doing happy and new, as a lot of the letters I need for year we're already using. When we pick that up, we then have a stamp we can use on our cake. So I'm going to line those letters up. I can then work from one side and just rock it against the side of my cake. Now, as I'm pushing those letters in, I'm just using a paddle smoother on the top of the cake just to keep it in place. I also have my board on a non-slip mat, so I know my cake isn't going anywhere. Now, if you find that any of your letters haven't pushed in enough, you can go in just individually over the top and just push them in a little bit more. I'm then going to take all the letters apart from the P off of the pickup pad and just push this in where we've got that space. I can then remove this, and I'm going to do exactly the same thing just to add the word year. I'm then going to mix some of the metallic hot pink luster dust by Sweet Sticks with some of my dipping solution. I'm going to go in and just really carefully fill in those letters. Now, I do actually have a 10% off code for everything on the Sweet Stamp website, including these letter sets and the brushes. So if you did want to get 10% off, all you have to do is enter Cakes by Linz at the checkout on their website. And I will put all the details in the description below, along with all the tools that I've used throughout today's video. So there we have the Happy New Year text on the front of the cake. Now, I have offset the cake slightly on the board just so I have more space around the front, so that I can add the disco ball. Now, to go along with those disco balls, I've also created some little pink balls using both of the techniques that I showed you in this video. So I have some small pink balls that are created using some candy melts, and I also have some slightly darker ones which I created by covering some polystyrene balls in some pink fondant. So I'm just sticking those down alongside the disco balls. So there we have the finished cake with these really fun disco ball cake toppers. Now, I've added them onto a New Year cake, but these would also be perfect for a birthday cake too. I really hope you've enjoyed this video tutorial and will be able to use some of these techniques in your own cake decorating. If you have enjoyed the video, as always, don't forget to hit that like button. And if you'd like to see more videos like this, then don't forget to subscribe. Now, all that's left for me to do is wish you all a very happy new year, and I shall see you in 2024. Bye!